Chapter 18. Shadows That Breathe. Journal entry, Day 18. The forest feels different today. Even in daylight, there's a heaviness in the air that makes it hard to breathe. The wind is still, the trees motionless, as if the whole world is holding its breath. I stayed at the camp until the sun was high, forcing myself to eat a little and gather my thoughts. My body is running on fumes, but I couldn't bring myself to sleep. Not after what happened last night. I keep replaying it in my mind. The figure in the clearing, the whispers, the journal that somehow knew what I'd seen. And worse, the overwhelming sense that something was watching me even now. The forest seemed to close in tighter as I moved, the trees crowding together in unnatural ways. I kept my rifle ready, my ears straining for any sound, but the woods were eerily quiet. The only thing breaking the silence was the crunch of my boots on the frost-covered ground. Each step felt like a betrayal, like I was announcing my presence to something that preferred me silent. I decided to head north, toward the river. It's a natural boundary, and if I can follow it upstream, I might find some sign of others, or at least a new place to regroup. But as I walked, the forest seemed to twist around me. I started noticing things that shouldn't be there. A child's shoe, half buried in the dirt, its fabric torn and rotting. A rusted bicycle leaning against a tree, vines coiling around its frame. And worst of all, a stuffed animal, a faded gray rabbit with one button eye missing, sitting upright on a stump as if waiting for someone to claim it. Each object sent a chill through me. They weren't just out of place, they felt wrong, like echoes of lives that had been erased. I didn't touch any of them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had placed them there for me to find. By late afternoon, I reached the river. Its waters were low and sluggish, the surface covered in patches of ice. The air here was colder, carrying a faint, sour smell that turned my stomach. I followed the bank upstream for a while, keeping close to the tree line. The sound of the water was a small comfort, masking the oppressive silence of the forest. That's when I saw the footprints. They were fresh, pressed deep into the muddy bank, bare feet, just like the ones in the valley. My pulse quickened as I crouched to examine them. The prints were smaller this time, too small for an adult. They led away from the water and into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. I told myself to leave them alone, to keep moving, but something compelled me to follow. The trail led me deeper into the woods, the trees growing thicker and the light fading faster than it should have. I found myself in a clearing just as the last rays of sunlight slipped below the horizon. The space was empty, save for a single object in its center. Another candle. It sat on the ground, unlit, with a box of matches beside it. The sight of it made my stomach twist. It was too deliberate, too perfect. Someone had left it for me. Against my better judgment, I struck a match and lit the candle. Its flame flickered weakly at first, then steadied, casting a small circle of light around me. The shadows at the edge of the clearing seemed to ripple and shift, as if alive. I took a step back, my rifle ready, and that's when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound, like breathing. It was coming from the shadows. The candle's flame danced wildly as the sound grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just breathing, it was labored, wet, like something struggling to draw air through a damaged throat. I raised the rifle, aiming toward the sound, but the shadows seemed to swallow the light. Then, from the darkness, a shape emerged. It wasn't like the figure I'd seen in the clearing the night before. This was something else. Something wrong. It was hunched and misshapen, its limbs too long and its movements jerky, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. Its face, or what should have been a face, was featureless, save for two deep, black hollows where eyes might have been. It moved toward me slowly, each step deliberate, as if testing the limits of my fear. My finger tightened on the trigger, but I hesitated. Shooting it felt pointless, like trying to stop a nightmare with a bullet. Instead, I stepped back, then turned and ran. The breathing followed me, growing louder and more frantic as I crashed through the trees. The candle in the clearing was the last thing I saw before the forest swallowed me whole. I didn't stop until I reached the river again, my lungs burning and my legs trembling. Whatever that thing was, it didn't follow me past the tree line. At least, I hope it didn't. I'm back at camp now, writing by candlelight again. The journal hasn't changed this time, but I keep glancing at it, half expecting the words to shift when I'm not looking. I don't know what's happening in these woods, but I know one thing for certain. I'm not the first person to be hunted here.